Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanande. Hare Krishna. So we are reading today from the Nectar of Devotion, chapter number 5, the purity of devotional service. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvedam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahakana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nana Shastra Vicharane Kavnipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Sharanyakaro Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajana Nandena Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyugo Shri Jiva Gopalako. So, chapter number 5, the purity of devotional service. Just a quick recap of what was covered in chapter 3 and chapter 4 leading up to chapter 5. So chapter 3 is entitled Eligibility of the Candidate for Accepting Devotional Service. So in this chapter, it's discussed what is needed for a person to actually practice devotional service and come to the platform of pure devotional service. And it explains how different people approach Krishna for different reasons. Like some are distressed, some are desiring money, some are inquisitive, and some are wise, and all of them can be considered pious people because they're coming to Krishna. And without piety, one cannot make any spiritual progress. Spiritual piety is needed. So one thing that is needed is spiritual piety, and then another thing that is needed is to become free from the bodily concept, to become free from the idea that we are these bodies and we are designated according to these bodily concepts. So to become free of that gives us eligibility to start practicing. And then what else is required is freedom from desires for mundane sense gratification, including liberation. And then in the next chapter, chapter 4, it is described all the different kinds of liberation that there are and how devotional service is superior to all of them, because it gives eternal satisfaction and it awards one an eternal opportunity to serve the Lord, whereas these different kinds of liberations just give some temporary satisfaction. And now we're on to the purity of devotional service, where Srila Rupa Goswami describes that all of the instructions that were discussed in all of the previous chapters can be summarized as follows. As long as one is materially inclined or desirous of merging into the spiritual effulgence, one cannot enter into the realm of pure devotional service. So as long as a person has any desire in his heart for sense gratification, including liberation, he cannot actually enter into devotional service. And then Rupa Goswami states that devotional service is transcendental to all material considerations, and that it is not limited to any particular country, class, society, or circumstance. And this is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that devotional service is transcendental and has no cause. Devotional service is executed without any hope for gain, and it cannot be checked by any material circumstances. It is open for all, without any distinction, and it is the constitutional occupation of the living entities. So it would be nice to go through some meditation and some research on how devotional service is transcendental and has no cause. So let's go through that a little bit more. So it's described how devotional service is transcendental because it's not limited to any one particular kind of person. It's actually meant for everyone. And in the Middle Ages, after Lord Nityananda, who is Lord Chaitanya's great associate, left this world, then there were some priestly persons who claimed to be the descendants of Lord Nityananda, and they called themselves the Goswami caste. And they claimed that devotional service was only meant for their caste and for nobody else. And then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is a very powerful preacher, completely smashed their idea, and that's actually written here, that he completely smashed their idea. He re-established the proper understanding that devotional service is meant for everyone to practice, regardless of who they are and where they come from. And it's written here that anyone who is engaged in devotional service is already at the status of being a high-class brahmana. So whoever they may be, they come to the platform of becoming a brahmana, regardless of where they were born and in what circumstances they find themselves. So in this way, devotional service is transcendental. It's not dependent on where we come from and those mundane bodily designations. And there's a beautiful verse from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is also mentioned in Nectar Devotion. Anyabhilashita shinyam gyanakamardhyana vritam anukulyana krishnanu shilanam bhaktir uttama. When first-class devotional service develops, one must be devoid of all material desires, knowledge obtained by monistic philosophy, and fruitive action. The devotee must constantly serve Krishna favorably as Krishna desires. So bhakti, it is pure love, and it's the expression of that love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of service. So it's not just a mundane emotion, and it has nothing to do with the three modes of material nature, but it's actually way above and beyond them. So in this way, bhakti is actually completely spiritual, because it's centered around the satisfaction of Krishna's senses. So it's transcendental because it's meant for everyone, and because it's not a material emotion, it has nothing to do with material designations or emotions. And bhakti is causeless, so let's take a look at that a little bit more. Bhakti is described as being a hetuki. So a hetuki can be translated as being causeless and unmotivated. So pure love, it's offering to the Lord everything you've got without expecting anything in return. Offering your heart to the Lord without expecting anything in return. But we might also consider that Krishna is the cause of all causes, isn't he? He is sarva karana karanam. He's the cause of all causes. So how is it that love for Krishna is without a cause if he is the cause of all causes? He is the cause of everything, but he also will never force anyone to love him, because then it can't be love, right? It's just that he is so attractive and so wonderful and so lovable that all the living entities naturally become attracted to him. It's our constitutional position. By nature, each and every one of us actually, within our hearts, do love him. But still, because we have minute independence, it's our decision whether or not we actually want to love him and want to offer our hearts to him with and expect nothing in return. Bhavatat bhaktir hetuki tvayi. We can pray to only want causeless devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And devotional service is also causeless because it's only possible because of causeless mercy, and it is in itself causeless mercy. And we can understand that by a statement that Krishna made to the gopis. He said that it's impossible for me to repay you or to show enough gratitude for your love. Therefore, please be satisfied by your own pious activities. So we can understand from this that devotional service is in itself so glorious that it is in itself causeless mercy, that Krishna, to his most dear devotees, this is what he is awarding because it's so glorious. And it's causeless because it's not received because of anything that we do, otherwise it wouldn't be called causeless. And then later in the Nectar of Devotion, it's discussed in chapter 25 how there's an example of causeless mercy given where Krishna and Balaram's friends went to the wives of the brahmanas who were performing a yagya, and the brahmanas were so busy with their mantras and with their sacrifice that they didn't even pay any attention to Krishna or his friends. But when his friends went to the wives, even though they don't know anything about Vedic Shastra, they don't know anything about mantras, yet they were the ones who received all the mercy. They gave everything they had to Krishna, and Krishna actually allowed them to come and see him. They're the ones who got the supreme mercy of the Lord, even without having undergone all these ritualistic performances or without having chanted any mantras or practiced any kind of severe austerity. They were just very simple people. So that example is given. So just to summarize that section, devotional service is not dependent on birth, it's not dependent on where we come from or the modes of material nature. And in this way, it's completely transcendental and it's causeless because it is in itself causeless mercy, and it's offered to the Lord voluntarily without expecting anything in return. And it was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who actually re-established this proper understanding and opened the doors for everyone to be able to practice again. So continuing with our reading, the so-called Brahmanas claim that one who is not born into a Brahmana family cannot receive the sacred thread and cannot become a high-grade Vaishnava. But we do not accept such a theory because it is not supported by Rupa Goswami nor by the strength of the various scriptures. Srila Rupa Goswami specifically mentions herein that every man has the birthright to accept devotional service and to become Krishna conscious. And then it's written in the Padma Puran where Vashishta tells King Dilipa, "My dear king, everyone has the right to execute devotional service, just as he has the right to take early bath in the month of Magh." So if someone takes a bath early in the morning, no one's going to stop them, right? Actually, it's encouraged, right? So similarly, when someone wants to practice devotional service, it should be encouraged. No one should stop them, definitely not. There's more evidence in the Skanda Purana, in the Kashi Kanda portion, where it is said, "In the country known as Mayuradvaj, the lower caste people who are considered less than Shudras are also initiated in the Vaishnava cult of devotional service. And when they are properly dressed with tilak on their bodies and beads in their hands and on their necks, they appear to be coming from Vaikuntha. In fact, they look so very beautiful that immediately they surpass the ordinary brahmanas." So Shrutakirti Prabhu, who is a very close associate of Srila Prabhupada, was his personal servant for many years, he was telling me how when he was with Srila Prabhupada, he always dressed very simply. He was a brahmachari and he had his saffron cloth and he wore very simple attire. And somebody gave him a silk garment, a silk saffron dhoti, and he thought, I can't wear such an opulent piece of cloth in front of my spiritual master. What will he think? But then one day he had nothing else to wear, so he wore that. And when he entered into Srila Prabhupada's quarters, when Prabhupada saw him, he said, "Wow!" And his eyes went big. He said, "You look like you just came from Vaikuntha." Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. And it's written in the Leela Amrita how even though like the Western devotees, they were naturally beautiful, they were looking so morose and dirty, and their beauty had become covered because of the conditions under which they were living. But then when Srila Prabhupada came and he gave them a Maha Mantra and he gave them this process of chanting Hare Krishna, then Prabhupada said, just as the monsoon revives the land of Vrindavan, making it fresh and verdant, and as the Vrindavan peacocks sometimes dance jubilantly, so the devotees, having shed their material bonds, were now ecstatically dancing and chanting the holy names. So these people who seemed or could be considered Shudras or lower than Shudras, low class people, they were all initiated into this chanting and given this process of devotional service, and they were practicing and dressed in the garb of Vaishnavas and came to the standard of becoming Brahmanas, and therefore they looked like they came from Vaikuntha. And it's described that such people actually surpass ordinary Brahmanas, because there are Brahmanas and there are Vaishnavas. So a Brahmana is not necessarily a Vaishnava. It's written in Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 2nd chapter, text 2, in the purport, how the Vaishnava stage is the postgraduate status of a Brahmana. A progressive Brahmana must necessarily become a Vaishnava, for a Vaishnava is a self-realized, learned Brahmana. So it's actually higher to become a Vaishnava than just remaining a Brahmana. And also it's described how a person, even if he seems to appear in a low family, he also has the opportunity to practice and become a Vaishnava, even if he appears to be in the family of Shudras. And an example is Srila Haridas Thakur. He appeared in the family of people who were considered outcasts, actually. And then Lord Chaitanya made him the Namacharya of the holy name of the Lord. And if a person is actually a Shudra, then it means that they're predominantly ruled by the mode of ignorance, because that's what the Shudras are. And then it's only once a person becomes a Brahmana that they can be considered in the mode of goodness, but a devotee actually transcends all of these modes. They become situated in Shudra Sattva, which is beyond the mode of goodness as well. There's a text which says that all the demigods and their exalted qualities, such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation, become manifest in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So all those Brahmanical qualities already reside in the body of a Vaishnava who has come to the platform of Shudra Sattva. And then there's an analogy given here. Just like how Kamsa, which is a ball metal, is turned into gold by being mixed with mercury. Similarly, a bona fide spiritual master under the guidance of authorities can turn anyone to the Vaishnav cult, so that naturally he may come to the topmost position of a Brahmana. And then Srila Rupa Goswami warns, however, that if a person is properly initiated by a bona fide spiritual master, he should not think that simply by the acceptance of such initiation, his business is then finished. One still has to follow the rules and regulations very carefully. If after accepting the spiritual master and being initiated, one does not follow the rules and regulations of devotional service, then he is again fallen. So we're reading that if we become initiated into devotional service, then we have to be regularly discharging devotional service. So what does that mean, to regularly discharge devotional service? It actually means constant chanting, Nityang Bhagavata Sevaya. By regularly hearing, by regularly chanting, then all of those troublesome tendencies in our heart start to be cleansed away. And it's also a matter of param dristvani vartate. because devotional service has to be unmotivated and uninterrupted for it to completely satisfy the self. So uninterrupted, we have to constantly be engaged, constantly be chanting, constantly be taking shelter in devotional service, and then we will be satisfied. We won't feel the need to engage in sense gratification. But Srila Prabhupada actually set the example for us. He was constantly chanting, and somebody once challenged him. They said, Prabhupada, you say we should chant but all the time, but it seems like sometimes you're not chanting. And then some experiment was done. I think a doctor checked him, and he was vibrating with the holy name, even though it looked like he wasn't saying anything. He was always chanting, actually. He was always vibrating with the holy name of the Lord. And he, even being in the position he is, would pray to Krishna, please protect me from Maya, protect me from Maya. And because he was always chanting and because he was always engaged in service, obviously there was no question of him ever deviating from his service. So he set that example for us, how devotional service should be continuous, it should be regular, it should be uninterrupted. And actually Krishna is always extending his shelter for us, and his holy names are always there for us. It's just that we have to learn how to accept that shelter all the time. And then there's no question of a fall down. And then it's described how there are 3 processes for elevating our consciousness into spiritual consciousness. One process is karma, and that's when we're engaged in ritualistic activities. And then there's jnana, which is where we're engaged in speculative processes. And it's described that one who has taken to bhakti, the devotional service of the Lord, he doesn't have to have anything to do with karma and jnana. So he doesn't have to speculate, because we have been given the process, we've been given all of the knowledge, everything has been given to us. We just have to make an effort to try and understand. And we don't have to engage in ritualistic performances. When we're offering items to the Lord, that's an expression of our love to the Lord. It's not just a ritualistic performance. So bhakti, it doesn't have to have anything to do with this. And actually, bhakti should have no tinge of any of this, it's said here. And then there is a statement in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 5th chapter, verse 17, wherein Sri Narada Muni advises Vyasadeva thus: even if one does not execute his specific occupational duty, but immediately takes direct shelter of the lotus feet of Hari, Krishna, there will be no fault on his part. And in all circumstances his position is secure, even if by some bad association he falls down while executing devotional service, or if he doesn't finish the complete course of devotional service and dies untimely, still he is not at a loss. So we know that verse, Niha bikramanashasti pradyavayona vidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayata mahato bhayat. There is no loss, there is no diminution. Whatever progress we make, it's eternal. And if a person does fall down, still he can become easily reinstated to his position. And one example is Ajamil. Ajamil was a brahmana, he was a good devotee, and then he became attracted by the prostitute. He became influenced by her association and started engaging in sinful activities. But he named his son Narayan, and then at the end of his life, he called out, Narayan, and the Lord came to protect him. He didn't forget the service Ajamil had offered before he fell down. And then another example is Bharat, who was a king, and he gave everything away to live in the forest and practice devotional service. And he was on the level of Bhav, and on such a level, there's only 2% chance for sense gratification. But then he became attached to a deer, and then in the next life he had to take birth as a deer. But still, whatever progress was made was never lost. A person who is simply just discharging his occupational duty in Varna and Ashram, however, with no Krishna consciousness, practically does not gain the true benefit of human life. The purport is that all conditioned souls who are engaged very frantically in activities for sense gratification, without knowing that this process will never help them get out of material contamination, are rewarded only with repeated births and deaths. It's described in Chaitanya Charitamrita by Ramananda Roy that actually there's no other way to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead by practicing the Varnashram system. But then it's written in the purports around this text that the Varnashram system by itself is actually not transcendental, it's not spiritual. And then in the text following from that explanation, it's explained that unless it's offered to the Lord, it's not actually spiritual. And then in the first canto of Bhagavatam, there's a text which says, ultimately the aim of Varnashram Dharma is to turn a crude man into a pure devotee of the Lord, or a Vaishnava. So that's the aim. So the Varnashram system, it's a stepping stone for spiritual understanding, and that's described in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, text 31. How the Varnashram system is meant to help elevate a person to a higher status of life, because it helps to put one in the mode of goodness, and the mode of goodness is a catalyst for pure goodness, or Shuddha Sattva, which is transcendental to those three modes. So in that way, the Varnashram system is a stepping stone to spiritual realization. But practicing the Varnashram system without practicing devotional service is actually just sense gratification, because anything done not for the service of the Lord within the material modes is sense gratification. And so it must be offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then it's further explained that it's confirmed in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th chapter, verse 32, where the Lord says to Uddhava, "My dear Uddhava, any person who takes shelter of me is in complete surrender and follows my instructions, giving up all occupational duties, is to be considered the first-class man." So, in the statement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is understood that people who are generally attracted to philanthropic, ethical, moral, altruistic, political, and social welfare activities may be considered nice men only in the calculation of the material world. From Srimad Bhagavatam and other authentic Vedic scriptures, we learn further that if a person simply acts in Krishna consciousness and discharges devotional service, he is considered to be far, far better situated than all of those persons engaged in philanthropic, ethical, moral, altruistic, and social welfare activities. Srila Prabhupada explained in a lecture, Canto 1, Srimad Bhagavatam, that any activity, even if it's pious, even if it seems pious, if it's not in service of the Lord, it's actually impiety. It's actually sense gratification, because it's just entangling them more into the material world. Like if someone does something good in the world, even if the results that they get are very good, still it's entangling, so it's not good. And there are so many different examples of altruistic organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organizations, and while their intentions may be very good, unless they come to the platform of devotional service, they can't actually fulfill what they are trying to achieve. And Prabhupada gives this example in relation to United Nations, that because they are still relating to one another on the bodily platform. They think, I'm this nation, you are that nation, I'm this body, you are that body. There's no question of them becoming united because they're still on the material platform. There cannot be any united nations in that way. So unless they come to the platform of devotional service, they won't achieve what they're trying to fulfill. And then in Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto, 5th chapter, verse 41, Karabhajana Muni addresses Maharaj Nimai as follows. My dear king, if someone gives up his occupational duties as they are prescribed for the different varnas and ashrams, but takes complete shelter, surrendering himself unto the lotus feet of the Lord, such a person is no more a debtor, nor has he any obligation to perform the different kinds of activities we render to the great sages, ancestors, living entities, and family and society members. Nor has he any need to bother executing the 5 kinds of yagyas, sacrifices, for becoming free from sinful contamination. Simply by discharging devotional service, he is freed from all kinds of obligations. The purport is that as soon as a man takes his birth, he is immediately indebted to so many sources. He is indebted to the great sages because he profits by reading their authoritative scriptures and books. And we're obliged to our forefathers because we take our birth in a particular family and we get the advantages and we inherit property. And we're indebted to our forefathers, so we have to offer something back to them. It's explained here that in general we're indebted to relatives, friends, and even animals such as cows and dogs who render us so much service. So we're indebted to all living entities ultimately because everyone is helping us to live in some way, and we're indebted to all of our ancestors as well. But it's explained here that by the one stroke of devotional service, if someone gives up all obligations and simply surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is no longer a debtor, nor obliged to any other source of benefit. So there are some nice analogies around this. It's like if we water the leaves of a tree, then the tree will not be properly nourished. If we try to worship this demigod, that demigod, we neglect the source of the demigods, if we don't water the root, then the tree will not be properly satisfied. But if you water that root, if you worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then all of the demigods and all the persons connected to the Supreme Lord, they're all satisfied. And another analogy is the hand. If we're hungry and the hand tries to enjoy food on its own, we will not be satisfied by that. So it's a matter of us offering our service to the Lord, and then in that way everyone actually becomes satisfied, and everyone in connection to us gets to benefit from that as well. Like Lord Nrsingadev says to Prahlad that 14 generations of his forefathers become liberated just because Prahlad appeared in the family. They didn't have to do anything, but they all got liberated just because Prahlad was a pure devotee. And similarly, Dhruva's mother, well, she was actually a great personality, but Dhruva was wondering at the end of his life, I can't go back to the spiritual world because my mother, she's the one who gave me so much guidance, and if she doesn't go back, how can I go back? And then he saw that she was actually going back before him, because Krishna takes note. He sees that these people are all connected to this devotee, let me give them benefit as well, because the Lord understands that a devotee has a connection to all of these people, and then we're not actually indebted on the material plane anymore, because they're all getting spiritual benefit, they're all getting liberated anyway. And in that way all the obligations all are fulfilled and everyone becomes situated in a higher platform of devotional service by being connected to a devotee. And I just thought we should read this again because it's such a powerful statement. By the one stroke of devotional service, if someone gives up all obligations and simply surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is no longer a debtor nor obliged to any other source of benefit. And then it's explained here. We know that verse, Sarva dharma parityakya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishami mahasuchaha. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, give up all your occupations and just become surrendered unto me. I give you assurance that I shall give you protection from all sinful reactions. But then one may think that because he is surrendering unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he will not be able to perform all of his other obligations. So we might have a fear that if I surrender, how will I take care of my family? How will I take care of everything that I need to do? And here I was thinking about the example of Sridhar Swami. Srila Prabhupada speaks about him in Vrindavan in 1974. How Sridhar Swami was thinking of taking sannyas, but he had a wife who was going to have a baby. So he thought, okay, when my wife has her baby, she will take care of the child and I can go and take sannyas and focus on my devotional service and preach. And then his wife had the baby and then she died. So he thought, no, who's going to take care of the baby? And he was wondering what to do because he was very much inspired to go and preach and practice in a more focused situation. And then he saw a little lizard, a baby lizard, and he was eating. And then he thought, well, the Lord is actually supplying all that is needed for all living entities, and I know that someone will take care of my child if I do go. So he did take sannyas, and he went. He took that as a sign. But of course for us, it doesn't mean that we should just abandon our household activities and take sannyas, just leave our families. No, we should understand that we also have individual duties and we should understand what they are, and by taking shelter in the instructions of our spiritual masters, they will help us to see what our particular duties are. Like Srila Prabhupada, he was a householder as well and he took care of his family. And then his spiritual master appeared to him in a dream and asked him to be initiated into the sannyas order. But he was thinking, how can I be initiated and leave my family? How can I do that? And he was very hesitant. He actually didn't want to. But then he had repeated dreams, and one of his godbrothers, actually, not one of them, many of them, wanted Prabhupada to take sannyas. So he understood that this is what his spiritual master wanted for him. But that may not be the case for all of us. We have to understand, under the guidance of our spiritual masters, we have to understand what our duties are. So when we're fully surrendered, we can understand that we're not actually obliged to anyone on the material platform. We're actually only eternally obliged to Guru and Krishna, but we still have other duties in service to them which must be carried out, and they will guide us what those duties are. So surrendering and becoming relieved of obligation is not the same as neglect of our service duties. That's important. Oh, we're running out of time. Okay, we're almost there. And then it's written here that yes, even though we may have this fear that if we surrender, how will we take care of all of our obligations? But the Lord repeatedly says that don't hesitate, don't consider that because you are giving up all other engagements, there will be some flaw in your life. Don't think like that. I will give you all protection. That is the assurance of Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. And one of my favorite verses, Ananyas chintayantam mam yajana paripashate Isham Nitya Viyuktanam Yogakshema Vahamiyaham. If we constantly engage in meditating on the Supreme Lord and serving Him, then He preserves what we have, He carries what we lack, He's the one taking care. So He will provide everything that is needed. As the regulative principles of scripture are not required by a liberated person, so the ritualistic principles indicated in the Vedic supplements are also not required for a person duly engaged in the service of Lord Ramachandra. In other words, the devotees of Lord Ramachandra or Krishna are already liberated persons and are not required to follow all the regulative principles mentioned in the ritualistic portions of the Vedic literature. And then also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th chapter, verse 42, it's written that, "My dear king, a person who has given up the worship of the demigods and has completely concentrated his energy in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has become very, very dear to the Lord. As such, if by chance or mistake he does something which is forbidden, there is no need for him to perform any purificatory ceremonies. Because the Lord is situated within his heart, He takes compassion for the devotee's accidental mistake and corrects him from within." So in many places, it's described, in many places in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that He takes special interest in His devotees, and He declares that nothing can cause His devotee to fall down because He is always protecting him. Like there's that verse where He says, "O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes." So, in conclusion, there was a pastime I wanted to tell, but we really ran out of time now. In conclusion, devotional service it's transcendental and it's causeless because it's not dependent on castes or where we're coming from. It's not dependent on anything on the material plane, and it's based on pure love without expecting anything in return. And simply by practicing under the guidance of our spiritual masters, even an ordinary person can become elevated to the position of a Vaishnava. And we also discussed how devotional service is transcendental to the Varna ashram system and to all altruistic activities. And that even though we are so obliged to so many living beings for their help in so many ways, all of those obligations and duties, they become fulfilled by the execution of devotional service. And then we discussed that it is important for us to understand that in fulfilling those obligations, it doesn't mean that we should neglect our duties in service to our spiritual masters, including taking care of family members and following the Varnashram system. And in surrendering, there's no need to fear that we will not be able to fulfill those service duties, because Krishna will always give us everything that is needed for our service. And even if while trying to serve we make some mistake and we fall down, just because we have accepted the process into our hearts, then we can just get back up again and continue our service and practice chanting, and we will return to the position from which we fell. But if we actually fully surrender to the process and constantly chant the holy names of the Lord, there's no question of a fall down. Even though the Lord is so forgiving, still we should avoid falling down. And if we are constantly taking shelter, then the Lord will always offer us His shelter and give us His protection, and we get to become very dear to Him. Okay. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. Are there any questions or comments or corrections? Right. Ganga Devi.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Some very nice points you made. I was just reflecting on Yurat Swami. He says that Krishna consciousness, you were talking about devotional services, offering our love to Krishna. So he was saying that Krishna consciousness is love masqueraded as philosophy. Oh, that was so nice. That, we actually following Srila Prabhupada and his philosophy, and the end result is love for Krishna. And in Kadamba Swami's last address, he spoke his highest realization, and he was saying that, we should just stick to this process, and at the end, everything will be so glorious, and basically back home, back to Godhead, just by following Srila Prabhupada, and basically not, being deviated by deviant philosophies and straying from the path of devotional service, but following Srila Prabhupada, ISKCON, and going to the spiritual world just by sticking to the process. So in this way, there is no, association of devotees is very important, and this is what Srila Prabhupada has given us, ISKCON, so that we can associate with devotees and not deviate from the process. Otherwise, we fall down, as you were mentioning. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much.
Krishna.
That's such an important point. Following what Srila Prabhupada gave us, the rules and regulations, then we won't fall down. Anyone else? Or not?
Hare Krishna. I was just wondering what the pastime you wanted to share was.
Oh, there were a few. One was, I heard from Pancha Jangri Prabhu. He was explaining, this is in relation to how anyone connected to a devotee gets benefit. So there was a family of devotees, and one of the family members, the father, he wasn't a devotee and he didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness. And he was in hospital, leaving his body. And his family came to see him and they were praying to Lord Nishingadev. And he was in a bit of an unconscious state, but he awoke briefly and he said, "Who is this person here, standing here?" And he pointed to a corner in the room and they didn't see anyone. And then he described that, well, he looks like a lion. He's got the face of a lion, but he's like a half man and a half lion. He described Nishingadev, but he doesn't know anything about Nishingadev. But because they were praying for him, Nishingadev came and appeared in front of him at the last moment of his life. The Lord actually appeared in front of him because they were devotees praying. And then another one was in relation to how Krishna, he never forgets the service offered to a devotee, and he will always try to give his shelter to a devotee who has even once tried to surrender their lives. So there were two devotees, Vaishnavis, on a plane, and they had a lot of prasadam with them, and they were sitting next to a man who seemed very grumpy, and they were offering their prasadam to him, and he said, no, I won't have that, thank you. And when he spoke to the air hostess, he said, "Actually, I'm vegetarian. Please, can you give me something vegetarian?" And they said, "This is vegetarian." And he said, No, I know who you are. I know you are devotees. And as soon as I saw you walk onto the plane, I knew Krishna would make me sit next to you because he always does this. He always makes sure I'm always with the devotees somehow. And he explained that he used to be a pujari in a temple, and he was trying to offer his service there for the deity, for the devotees, and he had some difficulty, some disagreement, and he left the movement and he stopped practicing. But he was still vegetarian, and he was at a work conference, and all they had that was vegetarian was tomatoes. So for many, many days, he just ate tomatoes, and now he was so hungry, and he was sitting on the plane, and Krishna made sure that he was sitting next to the devotees who had all the prasadam, because he knew that Krishna could understand what would happen for this devotee, and that he wanted to make sure that he was taken care of, even though he wanted to forget Krishna. And he said that. He actually said, I've tried so hard to forget Krishna. And he started crying. He said, I've tried so hard to forget Krishna and to walk away. But I did once offer my heart, and now I can see how Krishna is my greatest friend. He never leaves me. Never, never. That was it. Anything else? Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Gaur Nande.